The U.S. intelligence community has assessed that Russia is actively seeking to, quote, denigrate presumptive Democratic nominee Joe Biden in order to boost President Trump's re-election chances. China is less keen on President Trump, according to the National Counterintelligence and Security Center. Chinese leaders apparently see President Trump as unpredictable and are hoping that Biden will win the election. The NCSC also fears that Iran may try to undermine the president and the U.S. democratic institutions in general through an online influence campaign. CBS News intelligence and national security reporter Olivia Gazis is covering this story for us, and she joins us now. Olivia, great to have you. Beyond their preferences, what do we know about Russia, China, and Iran, and what they're actually doing to help their candidate of choice?
That is a great and essential question, and I think one that you've already seen some U.S. officials, lawmakers start to respond to and try to parse. According to the officials that I've spoken with who have been briefed on the intelligence underlying this assessment, there's really only one actor here that is actively engaged in interference measures, and that is Russia. As one official put it to me, there's a difference between having a preference in isolation and then actually acting on it. If you look at the language of the statement issued on Friday, you'll see that there's a specific action in the case of Russia that's being cited. This Ukrainian politician, Andrei Derkach, who has been spreading claims about corruption intended to undermine Biden, using weaponized, leaked information to undermine his candidacy. And there are also some pro-Kremlin elements, as yet unspecified, that have, as you said, been seeking to boost President Trump's candidacy on Russian state media and other social media outlets. Whereas, if you look at the example, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. I was going to say that we have heard President Trump say that China is, in fact, interested in Joe Biden, but he seems to be downplaying this Russia aspect of it. In an event in New Jersey on Friday, President Trump was asked about the intelligence statement, and I want to play that clip for our viewers.
I think that the last person Russia wants to see in office is Donald Trump, because nobody's been tougher on Russia than I have ever.
That's not what the intelligence is.
Well, I don't care what anybody says.
So, Olivia, does this mean that the Trump administration is not intending to act on the central findings in this intelligence assessment?
So I think it's hard at this stage to say what the White House is actually going to do, if anything, in response to this particular assessment. We did hear from the National Security Council yesterday that said the U.S. government would not stand for any foreign interference and would respond to any foreign threats intended to undermine our democratic processes. That said, you did clearly hear the president, who has demonstrated a reluctance in the past, not only to act on information that Russia is trying to boost his candidacy, but to accept it at all. So yes, you just heard him say that he actually believes Russia would prefer that he not win re-election in 2020. But it's worth noting that these warnings in themselves are meant to send a message to adversaries to say, look, we know what you're doing. We can identify exactly what you're doing. The public knows what you're doing. And so you'd better cut it out. You've heard from the national security apparatus since effectively 2016 saying we're going to do all we can to inoculate American voters against these kinds of foreign influence campaigns. And that, again, even if it isn't coming directly from the White House or from the president, is a statement on the part of the U.S. government.
And Olivia, as you point out in your article, last time around, intelligence agencies waited until after the election to state publicly that Russia had worked to get then candidate Trump elected. What's the significance of this intelligence statement being released now, 3 months before the election? As you just mentioned, part of it is to try and raise awareness among American voters, perhaps. But is there anything more to it than that?
Sure. Well, so yes, we are fewer than 90 days away from the November contest. And again, these national security agencies have really been stressing, we are working on this. We are protecting these elections. They're going to be the most secure that they've ever been. I think they and a lot of former Obama administration officials have openly acknowledged that they were perhaps too hesitant to issue more concrete, explicit information about what Russia was doing in 2016 and how that could affect the election itself. But it's worth noting that, it's quite a tightrope that these agencies are meanwhile walking. So this statement yesterday, a product of the U.S. intelligence community, they need to be able to issue some usable information to the American public while protecting their own sources and methods, how they collected this information to get at this assessment, while trying to avoid sort of a political firestorm from Congress, from displeasure from either Republicans or Democrats, of course, trying to avoid stoking the ire of the president. And they need to do all of that without discouraging voters from going to the polls in November, without dissuading them from going to the polls, and without undermining the credibility of the outcome itself. So that's a lot of hoops for them to jump through, and that explains why some of these statements are so hefty, so newsworthy, and so carefully parsed by everybody who's involved in reviewing them.
Certainly. I'm wondering if you can tell us a little bit more about the three countries that are involved in this intelligence assessment. As you said, we have evidence from intelligence officials that last time around, Russia certainly did try to interfere in the election. Are China and Iran in some ways taking their cues from Russia's actions?
That's also a very interesting question. So yes, so these are not novel actors. We've certainly never not heard them mentioned in one breath as actors likely to want to play in this space. There's only one real repeat offender, and that is Russia. But an intelligence assessment issued last year cited all three of them as likely to want to wage some sort of influence campaign in 2020. Not only that, but to sort of improve on the tactics that Russia had success with to make them more sophisticated, less detectable, otherwise to make them more impactful. What you should note, though, also is that Russia obviously is not deterred, despite some concrete and significant actions taken by the United States government. It's back, it's playing in this space, and it has apparently encouraged or inspired others to try to at least contemplate trying their hands in this space as well. So obviously they've made the calculus that the costs are not high enough, the rewards are too high, and they think that if they, at least take steps toward having the appearance of influence in the U.S. Election, that may work out better for them.
All right, Olivia, thank you. You can read her full article on the possibility of foreign influence in the upcoming presidential election on CBSNews.com.
Thanks, Lana.